Alright, in this video we're going to learn how to solve absolute value equations. Again, here are your objectives that you should be writing on top of your note sheet. So just to review, absolute value, remember the proper definition is the distance of value is away from 0. So we have our absolute value signs, which are 2 bars, like so. So if I was finding the absolute value of 5, we ask ourselves, how far is 5 from 0? Well, here's 5 on the number line, so we say it's 5 away. Interesting about absolute value, since distance can never be negative, it also equals the absolute value of negative 5, because negative 5 is also 5 away from 0. So both the absolute value of 5 and the absolute value of negative 5, both of these equal 5. So if I want to evaluate the following, I have the absolute value of 5, which we just had in the previous slide. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 9 is 9 away from 0, so that is 9. On C, I have the absolute value of negative 3. But on the outside, I have an additional negative, so the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So my final answer is negative 3. On D, we're going to have to use our order operations, which absolute value acts like parentheses, so we're going to simplify the inside. So I take 7 minus 13, which is negative 6. So I get 12 minus the absolute value of negative 6 divided by 3. And then I can simplify further. I still have 12 minus the absolute value of 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, so I have 12 minus 2, which my final answer is 10. So in this lesson, we are trying to learn how to solve absolute value equations. So there are going to be kind of two parts in the absolute value equation. You have the inside of the absolute value, and inside here we're going to have some variable expression. So this variable expression could be like x minus 6. On the right side, we are going to have just a number, what it equals to. So in this case, we could say it equals to 10. And this 10 represents the distance. So when you do word problems, which you'll be doing in class, whatever it equals means how far away are you from distance. So if I said the distance is 12, you would put 12 here. From here, since absolute value can equal the positive and negative distance, remember the number line, negative 5 and 5, from here you're going to kind of split your equation into two separate equations where you're going to have the inside, the variable expression inside, equal the positive, and then you're going to have the variable expression equal the negative, since absolute value will equal positive and negative. And then you solve each separately, so you will have, when you're done, two solutions. There are some special cases which we will examine, but most of the time you should have two solutions, when you equal the positive and when you equal the negative. A key thing is when you're doing absolute value, before you do your two equations, you have to isolate. So remember, isolate is getting by itself the absolute value. So here, if you think of, remember our two sides from solving equations, we need this part alone on one of the two sides. However, it is not, because we have the plus 6. So we need to move this term before we can start our two equations. So it's adding 6, so I'm just do like we do with equations. We're going to minus 6. And then I have the absolute value of x minus 7 equals 3. Now I will do my two separate equations where I have x minus 7 equals 3, and then I'll have x minus 7 equals negative 3 and finish it out. Alright, so now we're going to do some examples to put in your notes. So in this one I have the absolute value of t equals 4. Well, the absolute value of t on this one is actually, it's already isolated by itself, so I'm allowed to do my two equations. So I'm going to have t equals 4, and then I need the negative distance, so t equals negative 4. So notice again, both of these are my solutions. If I would plug both of these in, they would come out to be true statements. So on B, again, I have the absolute value sign all alone on the left side. So I'm allowed to do my two equations. So I have k plus 3, what's inside the absolute value, equals the positive distance, and k plus 3 equals the negative distance, which is negative 2. So from here, I'm going to solve each one separately. So I'm going to minus 3. So k equals negative 1. That's one of my solutions. And minus 3 in this one. And now k equals negative 5. And again, I can plug both of these answers back in to check to see if it makes a statement true. So in C, again, I have the absolute value all alone on the left side. So from here, I'm allowed to do my two equations. So I have 2m equals the positive distance, and 2m equals the negative distance, which is negative 4. Use my inverse operations that we learned with equations. So I have m equals 2. Divide by 2 here. I have m equals negative 2. Again, once again, we have two solutions of absolute value. And that should be kind of a hint when you're looking at absolute value equations. You'll be like, oh, I have the absolute value sign, and that should be the light bulb going off in your head. Like, oh, yep, I need two solutions because distance, I can have the positive distance and then the negative distance. All right, last one, similar to the ones we've already done. Again, I have the absolute value sign by itself. I'm going to write my two equations. I have 2m plus 1 equals 5, and 2m plus 1 equals negative 5, minus 1, 2m equals 4, divide by 2, m equals 2 as one solution. And we're going to minus 1, 2m equals negative 6, divide by 2, m equals negative 3. So on these next slides, notice on E and on F, we do not have the absolute value sign by itself. It is not isolated. So we need to move anything on the outside. So we need to move 2. So you have to ask yourself what operation is between 2 and the absolute value sign. Well, since they're next to each other, that indicates multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I need to divide both sides by 2. So I'm left with the absolute value of 3d minus 1 equals 5. Now, since it's by itself, I can do my two equations. So 3d minus 1 equals 5. And 3d minus 1 equals the negative distance, which is negative 5. Add 1. 3d equals 6. Divide by 3. d is 2. Add 1. 3d equals negative 4. Divide by 3. Again, you're going to be left with either a decimal answer, you can leave it as a fraction. I'm just going to leave it as an improper fraction of negative 4 over 3. But again, you could write that as negative 1 and 1/3 or negative 1.3 repeating. So on F, I have two things that are actually on the outside of the absolute value sign. I have a plus 2 and 3. So normally when we solve equations, we have to move the adding and subtracting part first. So I'm going to minus 2 from both sides. So I have 3, the absolute value of y minus 6 equals 6. And then again, 3 is multiplying to the absolute value part. So I'm going to divide by 3. So I have y minus 6 absolute value equals 2. And to get rid of the absolute value sign, we need to make it equal to the positive distance and negative distance. 6. Y equals 8. One solution. Add 6. Y equals 4. And again, you can plug both values in and they both should check to see if you have the correct answer. So the thing you need to think about is, can distance be negative? So if you think about driving a car, even though you're in reverse, are you going a negative distance? Well, the answer is no. Even though we may indicate it with a negative sign, so for instance in football, if you lose yardage, we say it's negative, but you still win a distance. So it's still positive. Therefore, the absolute value, whatever is in here, whatever variable expression, cannot equal a negative number. And if you think about it, no matter what value or number I put in here, because distance is always positive, it's going to give me a positive answer. If you have the absolute value 3, that equals 3, and the absolute value negative 3 equals 3. And the lowest number I could have is the absolute value 0 equals 0. All of these are 0 or higher. So I cannot produce a negative answer. So when we're solving our absolute value equations, if I'm doing my absolute value equation and I have my variable expression inside and it equals a negative number of, say, like negative 6, this is a case that is not possible to solve, so we will write no solution. And that's all the further you can go. You don't find your two answers, you just write no solution. There will not be a solution to be found. So what's the difference? It can be a little tricky when to know it is no solution. So if you look on this side, all these answers have no solution. If you look right away, I have the absolute value sign isolated and equals a negative number, so I can write no solution, or NS if you want a shortcut. Where on this side, it already equals a negative number, but if I isolate the absolute value sign, which is what we want, because the absolute value cannot equal 0, I'd minus 4 over, and I still get negative 2. The absolute value of x equals negative 13. But when I divide by negative 2, it makes the absolute value equal a positive 13/2. So that one will have our two solutions. Now on the next row, on this one originally, it looks like, oh, it's going to have a solution, it equals a positive. But when I minus 6 over, the absolute value equals negative 4. Well, absolute value cannot equal a negative, so I write no solution. Similarly, on the bottom, it looks like it's equaling a positive, but I have to divide by a negative 4. And then I get x plus 1 equals negative 4. Therefore, this one also has no solution. And like over here, it looks again from the start that it's going to end up being no solution, but when I get my absolute value sign isolated, then it actually ends up equaling a positive. So these will have solutions. Divide by negative 4, negative 16 divided by negative 4, two negatives make a positive. So I get positive 4. So all three of these will have our two solutions. So just to review, remember when you're solving absolute value equations, you isolate the absolute value. Do not do your two equations before that. And then you can do your two equations to get your two answers. Absolute value, this is kind of just review the definitions, your distance from 0. And remember, you can have a positive distance and you can have a negative distance. And then absolute value cannot equal a negative number because it's always going to produce a positive number. This concludes this video. Just a reminder to go do your reflections so I can give you credit that you watched the video.